Welcome to the channel where American history becomes simple, clear, and meaningful. Here, we don't just study dates and events, we learn English through real stories that shaped the United States. In today's episode, we explore From Chaos to Constitution. As we move through this story, we'll discover how ordinary people, over time, slowly began to see themselves in a new way, but as Americans. So listen carefully, learn naturally, and travel back in time with us. Let's begin.
State constitutions. The success of the revolution did more than secure independence. It gave Americans the opportunity to transform revolutionary ideals into functioning systems of government. Even before independence was formally declared, the Second Continental Congress had urged the colonies on May 10, 1776, to establish new governments that would best promote the happiness and safety of their people. Many colonies had already begun this process, and within a year of the Declaration of Independence, all but 3 had drafted their own constitutions. These new state constitutions reflected the powerful influence of democratic thought. They did not completely reject the past, instead they rested upon the familiar foundations of colonial self-government and English legal traditions. Yet they were infused with the spirit of republicanism, an ideal long praised by Enlightenment thinkers, emphasizing civic virtue and resistance to concentrated power. At the heart of these constitutions was the determination to secure the unalienable rights that had been denied under British rule. Each began with a Declaration or Bill of Rights. Virginia's constitution proved especially influential. Its Declaration of Rights affirmed principles such as popular sovereignty, rotation in office, free elections, and fundamental liberties including moderate bail, humane punishment, trial by jury, freedom of the press, and freedom of conscience. It also asserted the people's right to reform or alter their government. Other states expanded these protections, adding explicit guarantees of freedom of speech, assembly, and petition. Many constitutions included the right to bear arms, protection through a writ of habeas corpus, security against unlawful searches of one's home, and the promise of equal protection under the law. All established governments divided into 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, with each designed to check and balance the others. The most radical constitution emerged in Pennsylvania. There, political power shifted towards artisans, frontier settlers, and small farmers. The new state constitution allowed every male taxpayer and his sons to vote, imposed strict rotation in office, and created a single-chamber legislature. It reflected a more direct and populist vision of Republican government. Yet, for all their advances, these constitutions revealed serious limitations. Documents that proclaimed natural rights did not extend equality to all. In the southern states, enslaved people were entirely excluded from the protections of liberty. Women possessed no political rights. Even among white men, suffrage was not universal. While some states allowed all taxpayers to vote, including Delaware, North Carolina, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, most required officeholders to meet property qualifications. Thus, the revolution advanced liberty and constitutional government, but it did so within the boundaries of an unequal society. The ideals of natural rights and popular sovereignty had been written into law, yet their full meaning remained unrealized. The promise of equality would continue to challenge the new nation long after independence had been won.
The Articles of Confederation. The long struggle with Britain had gradually transformed colonial attitudes toward unity. In 1754, colonial assemblies had rejected the Albany Congress and its Albany Plan of Union, unwilling to surrender even a small portion of their autonomy to a central authority, even one of their own creation. Independence, however, altered that perspective. During the Revolution, cooperation among the colonies had proven not only possible but necessary. Shared sacrifice reduced the fear of collective governance, though it did not eliminate suspicion of centralized power. In 1776, John Dickinson drafted the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Adopted by the Second Continental Congress in November 1777 and finally ratified by all the states in 1781, the Articles created the first national framework for the United States. Yet the structure they established reflected the fragile sense of national identity that still prevailed. The Union was deliberately loose. The central government lacked authority to levy taxes, regulate commerce, or impose tariffs. It had only limited control over foreign affairs, and several states even pursued their own diplomatic negotiations. Military power was similarly fragmented. Some states maintained their own armies and navies. Without a stable national currency, commerce relied on a confusing mixture of foreign coins and rapidly depreciating paper money issued by both state and national authorities. Peace exposed these weaknesses more clearly than war had. Economic hardship spread across the young republic. Merchants who had prospered during wartime contracts now faced declining trade and the loss of benefits once derived from the British mercantile system. States attempted to protect their own economies by favoring local goods through inconsistent tariff policies, creating confusion and rivalry rather than unity. Calls for a stronger central authority grew louder. Farmers bore the heaviest burden. Agricultural production exceeded demand, driving down prices. Many farmers, deeply in debt, struggled to meet payments and feared foreclosure or imprisonment. Creditors crowded the courts with lawsuits seeking repayment. Throughout 1786, reform conventions and informal assemblies across several states demanded relief. The most dramatic unrest erupted in Massachusetts. There, under the leadership of former Continental Army Captain Daniel Shays, armed groups of farmers began preventing county courts from convening, hoping to halt debt judgments until political change could occur. In January 1787, approximately 1,200 rebels marched toward the federal arsenal at Springfield. Poorly armed with staves and farm tools, they were confronted and repelled by state militia forces. Reinforcements, led by General Benjamin Lincoln, dispersed the remaining insurgents. 14 rebels were sentenced to death, though most were eventually pardoned or given light sentences. A newly elected state legislature later enacted limited debt relief measures that addressed some of the farmers' grievances. Though suppressed, Shays' rebellion exposed the vulnerabilities of the Confederate government. It revealed that the nation lacked both economic stability and effective authority to maintain order. What had once seemed a prudent defense of state sovereignty now appeared dangerously inadequate. The crisis convinced many leaders that the experiment under the Articles of Confederation required serious revision, and that the task of building a durable union was far from complete.
The problem of expansion. With independence secured, the United States turned once again to a familiar and unresolved issue: Western expansion. Beyond the Appalachian Mountains stretched vast and fertile lands rich in opportunity but complicated by overlapping land claims, Native American presence, fur trade interests, and the challenge of establishing local government. Even before the Revolution, settlers had pushed steadily westward. By 1775, scattered frontier communities along western waterways already counted tens of thousands of inhabitants. Isolated by mountain ranges and vast distances from eastern political centers, these settlers often created their own systems of local rule. After the war, migration accelerated. Families from the tidewater regions and other eastern states moved into the interior's river valleys, forests, and prairies.
By 1790, more than 120,000 people lived in the Trans-Appalachian West. Yet political uncertainty shadowed this growth. Before independence, several colonies had claimed extensive lands beyond the Appalachians, and these claims frequently overlapped. States without Western claims viewed this situation as deeply unfair. Maryland, representing those states lacking Western territory, proposed that these lands should become common national property, to be divided and administered by Congress for the benefit of all. Although initially controversial, this idea gradually gained acceptance. In 1780, New York began the process by ceding its Western claims to the national government. In 1784, Virginia, which possessed the largest claims, relinquished its lands north of the Ohio River. Other states followed. Soon, Congress held control over the immense territory north of the Ohio River and west of the Allegheny Mountains. This shared possession of Western lands became one of the clearest expressions of emerging national unity and sovereignty. Yet ownership alone did not solve the problem of governance. The Confederation Congress faced the task of organizing and administering these territories fairly and effectively. Its solution came in the form of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This landmark measure established a structured process for governing the Northwest Territory. Initially, Congress would appoint a governor and judges. When the population reached 5,000 free adult male inhabitants, residents could elect a bicameral legislature and send a non-voting delegate to Congress. Once a territory reached 60,000 free inhabitants, it would be admitted to the Union as a state on an equal footing with the original 13. The ordinance guaranteed civil liberties, encouraged public education, and, most significantly, prohibited slavery within the territory. It rejected the traditional European notion that colonies existed merely for the benefit of a distant mother country and were inherently subordinate. Instead, it established a new principle. Territories were not inferior dependencies, but integral parts of the nation, entitled by right to equality and eventual statehood. In organizing the West, the young republic did more than expand its borders. It defined a new model of national growth, one rooted in law, equal status, and the promise of opportunity, laying the foundation for continental expansion in the decades to come. Constitutional Convention. By the time the Northwest Ordinance was enacted, American leaders were already confronting a deeper crisis. The government, created under the Articles of Confederation, had proven too weak to hold the nation together effectively. George Washington, observing the fragile union among the states, famously described it as little more than a rope of sand. Tensions between states made the weakness impossible to ignore. A dispute between Maryland and Virginia over navigation rights on the Potomac River led to a small meeting in 1786 at Annapolis, Maryland. Representatives from only 5 states attended, but the discussion quickly moved beyond local concerns. One delegate, Alexander Hamilton of New York, argued that the nation's commercial problems were inseparable from larger political and economic failures. The Confederation system itself required fundamental revision. The Annapolis meeting issued a bold call for a general convention of all the states to meet the following spring in Philadelphia. At first, the Confederation Congress reacted with suspicion, seeing the proposal as an overreach. But when Washington lent his support and agreed to attend, opposition softened. Over the winter of 1786 to 1787, every state except Rhode Island selected delegates. In May 1787, 55 men assembled at what became known as the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. It was an extraordinary gathering of experienced leaders, veterans of colonial assemblies, state governments, Congress, the judiciary, and the Revolutionary Army. Washington, widely respected for his integrity and wartime leadership, was unanimously chosen to preside. Among the most influential delegates were James Madison of Virginia, a meticulous student of political theory who would later be called the father of the Constitution, and Benjamin Franklin, whose long career in diplomacy and science lent prestige to the proceedings. Pennsylvania sent Gouverneur Morris, a strong advocate of national authority, and James Wilson, a tireless supporter of popular sovereignty. Massachusetts was represented by Rufus King and Elbridge Gerry, while Connecticut sent Roger Sherman. Hamilton represented New York. Notably absent were Thomas Jefferson, serving as American minister to France, and John Adams, serving in Great Britain. The average delegate was only 42 years old, a relatively young assembly charged with reshaping a nation. Although Congress had authorized the convention merely to revise the Articles of Confederation, the delegates soon concluded that amendment would not suffice. As Madison later recalled, they set aside the Articles entirely and undertook the creation of a new framework of government. Their central challenge was to balance two competing principles: the sovereignty of the states and the necessity of an effective national authority. The solution they pursued rested on defining and limiting federal power. The national government would exercise specific, enumerated powers, carefully listed and delegated, while all remaining authority would be reserved to the states. Yet the new government would not be powerless. It would have the authority to coin money, regulate interstate and foreign commerce, declare war, and make peace. In short, it would possess genuine sovereignty in matters that concerned the nation as a whole. In Philadelphia, the fragile rope of sand began to take the shape of a durable constitutional system, one designed to reconcile liberty with order, local self-government with national unity.
Debate and compromise. The statesmen who gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 were deeply influenced by the Enlightenment political thought, especially the writings of Montesquieu and John Locke. From Montesquieu, they embraced the principle of the separation and balance of powers. From Locke, the idea that government existed to protect natural rights and derived its authority from the people. Combined with colonial experience under British rule, these ideas convinced the delegates that liberty could survive only if power were divided. They therefore agreed that the new government must contain three separate and coordinate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, each capable of checking the others. The legislature itself would consist of two houses, following both British and colonial precedent. On these structural principles there was broad agreement. But when discussion turned to representation, sharp divisions emerged. Delegates from small states, such as New Jersey, feared that basing representation on population would diminish their influence. They preferred the system under the Articles of Confederation, where each state had equal representation. Large states like Virginia argued that representation should reflect population size. The debate threatened to fracture the convention until Roger Sherman proposed what became known as the Great Compromise: proportional representation in the House of Representatives and equal representation in the Senate. This solution dissolved the immediate crisis between large and small states. Yet other controversies soon followed. One of the most difficult concerned slavery. Southern states wanted enslaved people counted toward representation in the House, increasing their political power, while some northern delegates objected. A compromise was reached. For purposes of taxation and representation, each enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a free inhabitant. The agreement resolved the dispute temporarily, though it embedded a profound moral contradiction within the Constitution. Delegates also disagreed over how democratic the new government should be. Some, including Sherman and Elbridge Gerry, feared excessive popular influence, especially in light of recent unrest such as Shays' Rebellion. Others believed the government must rest on a broad popular base. Compromises were struck over the election of representatives, senators, and the president.
Western lands, too, sparked debate, but the principle established earlier in the Northwest Ordinance that new states would enter the Union on equal footing ultimately prevailed. After months of debate in the summer heat of Philadelphia, the convention produced a remarkably concise yet sophisticated document. The Constitution granted the national government clearly defined powers to levy taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce, coin currency, establish post offices, raise armies and navies, conduct foreign policy, and admit new states. Crucially, it also authorized Congress to pass all laws necessary and proper to carry out these powers, ensuring flexibility for future generations. The system of checks and balances reinforced the separation of powers. Congressional legislation required presidential approval. Presidential appointments and treaties required Senate confirmation. The president could be impeached by Congress. Federal judges, appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, could likewise be removed through impeachment. Courts were empowered to interpret the Constitution and federal laws, establishing the foundation for judicial review. To protect the Constitution from impulsive change, Article 5 created a demanding amendment process requiring supermajorities at both the national and state levels. Stability was thus built into the framework. Perhaps the most revolutionary decision concerned enforcement. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had possessed authority on paper but lacked the means to enforce its decisions. The new Constitution resolved this by empowering the federal government to act directly on individuals, not merely on states. Article 6 declared the Constitution and federal laws the supreme law of the land, binding judges in every state. This supremacy clause ensured that national authority would prevail where constitutionally exercised. Debate over the framers' motives has continued for centuries. In 1913, historian Charles A. Beard argued in An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution that the framers were primarily motivated by economic self-interest, particularly the protection of commercial and financial holdings. Yet figures such as James Madison, who played a central role in drafting the Constitution, did not fit neatly into this interpretation. Economic, sectional, and ideological interests all shaped the debates, but so did genuine idealism. As children of the Enlightenment, the framers sought to create a government capable of preserving liberty while maintaining order, a system strong enough to govern, yet limited enough to protect freedom. The Constitution they produced became more than a legal framework. It embodied enduring principles of individual rights, balanced power, and national unity. Those ideals remain central to American identity to this day.
Ratification and the Bill of Rights. September 17, 1787. After 16 exhausting weeks inside Philadelphia's Independence Hall, the moment had finally come. The arguments had quieted. The compromises had been written. The ink was ready. 39 of the 42 delegates stepped forward to sign the finished Constitution. Some signed with confidence, others with hesitation. A few refused entirely. As the last signatures were placed on the parchment, Benjamin Franklin slowly rose. Throughout the long summer, his eyes had often drifted to the half-sun painted in brilliant gold on the back of George Washington's chair. He had wondered whether it was a rising sun or a setting one. Now, he said, he knew. It was rising. That evening, the delegates adjourned to the city tavern. They dined together, exchanged warm farewells, and returned to their separate states. The convention was over, but the struggle for the nation was not. The Constitution meant nothing unless the people accepted it. It required ratification from conventions in 9 of the 13 states before it could take effect. Across the country, debate erupted. Was this new government too powerful? Would it crush the states, tax the people heavily, drag the young republic into endless wars?
Two sides formed almost immediately. The Federalists believed the nation needed a stronger central government to survive. The Anti-Federalists feared that strength would turn into tyranny. Newspapers printed fiery essays. State legislatures argued. Town meetings overflowed with anxious citizens. In Virginia, opposition was fierce. The Anti-Federalists attacked the Constitution's very first words, "We the people of the United States." Why were the individual states not named? Had the delegates quietly erased state sovereignty? Leading the charge was Patrick Henry, whose powerful voice once called for liberty or death. Now he warned backcountry farmers that a distant national government would forget them. The debate nearly tore Virginia apart. In the end, a compromise saved the day. Supporters of the Constitution promised that amendments would be added to protect individual rights. With that assurance, Virginia ratified the document on June 25, 1788. Meanwhile, in New York, another battle unfolded, this one fought with words. Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison wrote a series of essays defending the new Constitution. Published in newspapers, these essays explained how separate branches of government would check and balance one another, preventing tyranny. The essays would later be known as the Federalist Papers. Gradually, they persuaded enough delegates. On July 26th, New York ratified the Constitution. Yet one fear lingered across the states: the absence of clearly written protections for individual liberties. One of the strongest critics was George Mason, author of Virginia's Declaration of Rights. He had refused to sign the Constitution because it did not list the rights of the people. Together with Patrick Henry, he campaigned against ratification unless amendments were promised. 5 states agreed to ratify only on the condition that such protections be added immediately. The promise could not be ignored. When the first Congress met in New York City in September 1789, calls for amendments were nearly unanimous. Congress proposed 12 amendments. By December 1791, 10 had been ratified by the states. They became known as the United States Bill of Rights. These amendments guaranteed freedom of speech, religion, and the press. They protected citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. They ensured fair trials and due process. They prohibited cruel and unusual punishment. And they declared that the people held rights beyond those specifically written. With the Bill of Rights in place, the Constitution gained something more than authority. It gained trust. Since then, only 17 more amendments have been added. Some reshaped the machinery of government. Most expanded the rights and freedoms first promised in 1791. What began in a closed room in Philadelphia had survived suspicion, fear, and fierce argument. The rising sun Franklin spoke of had not set. It had only just begun to climb.